Welcome to our talk tonight. Is there a God? We want to welcome our online viewers. We're thrilled that you're here with us and so honored that you would take the time to join us for this evening. Let me introduce myself. I'm the assistant pastor here at Bethel and looking forward to spending just a little bit of time with you. So let's talk about our question. Is there a God? Perhaps you could ask it this way. Is God real? Is God real? Why ask this question? Let me suggest a couple different reasons for that you would want to ask this question, or why you would want to know, is God real? First, this is our first point, 4 reasons you must ask, is there a God? First, we want to live in reality. We want to live in reality. I love cotton candy, and I love flying. And cotton candy kind of looks like a cloud a little bit if you squinted at it and it was a little far away. But if you thought cotton candy was a cloud, you would never really want to go flying again because you'd always be concerned that your airplane would run into it and it would clog the engines and then you'd have problems. It'd be stuck in a sticky mess. We want to live in knowing what reality is so we can build and operate our lives well upon foundations that we know are secure. This is why we study math, science, history, because we want to operate in a space of reality. When you change your oil, you want this to be true as well. You might have a technician that enjoys Coca-Cola, and you don't want him to put Coca-Cola in your vehicle just because he enjoys Coca-Cola and thinks your car will enjoy it too. You want him to live in reality, that your car was designed to use oil as a means of lubrication. So we have to ask, if there is a God, if that is reality, wouldn't that affect reality? And we'd want to know. A.W. Tozer, a famous writer, says, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. He said it affects he argues that the reality of God, what he believes, changes the way we live more than anything else about us. And then why else would we want to know that God exists? Because having a relationship with a supernatural being could be beneficial. Some people say, I don't need a crutch, someone looking after me, a guardian angel, if you will. But what if there was a need that you didn't know about that only a supernatural being could meet? For example, you haven't died yet. Have you? Even if you've battled through all the great struggles of life, cancer, war, starvation, loss of a loved one, loss of a child even, you cannot say this, I've done it all and been fine. I don't need God in my life because you haven't lived every chapter yet. What about the love that a relationship with God could provide? I like being loved. Being loved is fantastic. I love being loved. I like living in a place where other people wish me good and do good to me. We had a child a couple years ago, and people brought over food. I didn't do anything to have this child, but people brought over their food, and I enjoyed it. It was just out of love, and it was good for me. How much could God love you? Well, enough to die for you, the Bible argues. 1 John 15 says, that's a great love. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. If there was a God and he loved you and wanted to show you he loved you, wouldn't you want to know that? Well, one might say, I don't need his love, which is fair enough. But wouldn't you want to know it was available to you instead of being ignorant of it? If I told you that there was $1 million available to you in a safety deposit box in a bank, you say, well, I don't need that. True, fine. But wouldn't you want to know if it was available for you in case you did need it? Therefore, if there was a God and he said, I want to adopt you into my family, wouldn't that information be information you should know? I have a good relationship with my father, and I have a good father. Very few people are fortunate enough to have both. I enjoy talking to my dad, spending time with my dad, call him once a week or so. And I enjoy that relationship. I enjoy his advice, his expertise, his life experiences, his care for me. But there's also benefits to the relationship that I enjoy that are very tangible. He financed my college education, or most of it. I enjoy that aspect of our relationship, appreciate that. What's the third reason why I would want to ask if God is real? I want to know. Because see, a creator would have a reason for creating. I recently threw away a small rubber disc because I didn't know where it came from in my house. I found it in my house, didn't know where it came from, didn't know its purpose. Later I found out that it went underneath a machine in our house and is the fourth foot of 4 legs on that machine. And now the machine sits cockeyed, it's lopsided, because I didn't know its purpose, I didn't know its value. Now I could make a purpose for it, but what if I couldn't? What if I couldn't perform in a flexible way? Would it then be trash? Because many people say being passionate or happy is my life's purpose. Finding adventure is my life's purpose. Being loved and loving is my life's purpose. Those are wonderful things to have in your life. But what if they were not available to you? Or what if they were taken from you? Was your life without purpose then? What I'm asking is this: if there was a God that created me, would it also lead me to reason that there was a purpose for which he created me that was able, and I needed to be able to meet, or that I was able to meet despite the circumstances out of my control? And then lastly, why would it be important that we ask this question? D, Creator might hold me accountable to fulfill a purpose. If there is a God and he had a purpose for your life and you weren't doing that purpose, would that be a problem? But maybe you could say, my purpose is doing what I love. What though if I am expected to fulfill the purpose for which I was created? I drink hot tea. I drink at least 2 cups a day, but then I reuse tea bags like all day long. So if you see me throughout the day, as this poor staff on our church see me, I typically have a cup of hot tea. Summertime, 100 degrees, no problem. I typically have a cup of hot tea with me or in proximity to me. And I have this one cup that I really, really, really like. It's just a plastic cheap cup. I just really, really like it. It says, "It's cool to be kind" on it. And I've rubbed that all off, so you can't even read that anymore. But I love this cup. Now, if that cup enjoyed being a coffee cup or teacup, it'd be great. But what happens if that cup decided one day that its purpose was to be a sieve? I am called to be, what makes me happy is to be a sieve. Okay? And so when I put the hot tea in, all over my lap, right? Is that fine for the cup to be a sieve? Sure. What about, though, from my end of the relationship as the owner of the cup? That's a problem, right? It's not doing what it was designed, what I wanted it to do. And so there might be some repercussions. What I'm asking is this: wouldn't the cup want to know if a higher power was in its life? If you were a cup and you were like, I'm deciding I'm going to be a sieve, wouldn't you want to know if there was a higher power in your life that wanted you to be a cup? I love to travel. I've been to Scotland a couple times. I love traveling to Scotland. I caught myself, not recently because of COVID, but I was over there one time and I caught myself speeding on accident. You're on the other side of the road. You're dealing with just different parameters that you're working through. Maybe you're using a manual or something. And I caught myself. I looked up and there was a speed camera, which are quite prevalent there. And I caught myself speeding a little bit. And I thought, oh, I'm an American. Won't really matter. No, I didn't say that, did I? Wouldn't matter where I was born. Wouldn't matter if I was born in America or Australia. If I was speeding in Scotland, I am accountable to their laws, and they will hold me accountable. Now, I wasn't speeding that fast, so obviously they didn't care that much, and I never got a ticket. But whether I broke it out of ignorance or not, I will be held accountable for it. Let's say there is a God and he does have a law that is going to judge us by. Wouldn't you want to know that? Now, is this a fear tactic to get you to believe in God? And on the contrary, I could have spun it that way, and I have greatly restrained myself to focus on that it matters that we ask the question, is there a God? And I'm submitting that to you as a reason. So now that we have a good set of reasons to ask the question, let me loosely define what I mean by God, because you can define it in a lot of different ways, and that's a future talk that we can have. But Merriam-Webster says this: God is the perfect and all-powerful spirit or being that is worshipped as the one who created and rules the universe. When I ask, is there a God, I'm not asking, is there a being out there that's very strong, but that is all-powerful. I'm not asking, is there a being out there that knows lots of things. I'm asking if there's but instead, that knows everything. I'm not asking, is there a being out there that is in many places, but is in all places at once? And so I'm asking about a very specific thing. I'm not asking if there is a God among many powerful gods, but I'm asking if there is one God among many powerful, I'm not asking, is there a God among many powerful gods that rises above, but is there one universal life-giving creator that exists? Is there a God that is the being that has created the universe and is interactive in our lives? Now, to ask the question, is there a God, I think it's fair to start with, why would we believe God doesn't exist? Because people have a lot of reasons. Let me give you 9, and then let's work through them to see if they're reasonable questions. And so let me give you 9 of these. This is point number 2. Why would we believe God exists? A, he hasn't revealed himself to me. Why do I believe God doesn't exist? Because he hasn't shown himself to me. I can't see him. I can't feel him, can't touch him, can't taste him. If there is a God and supposedly he loves me, why hasn't he spoken to me? Doesn't God want to get to know me? Doesn't God want me to get to know him? If he can do anything, why not just appear to me one day and show me something amazing, something supernatural, to know he is real? Maybe you've prayed like this. I've done this as a kid. I was out one day and I was trying to decide in my life, is there a God or not? I was raised to believe that there is a God, but that doesn't necessarily mean I believed it. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, if there is a God, God, help me do this supernatural feat, and then I'll know you exist. And he didn't. Nothing happened. Okay, well, where do I go from that? I wondered if God was real or not. I think a lot of people pray something like that. God, if you're real, then do X, and I'll know you are there. Or just talk to me. But could it be possible that God does not reveal himself to you because he is honoring humanity's demands to not speak? You say, I never asked God to do that. But history affects us whether we wish it to or not. I happen to be blessed to live in this fantastic country that I love very dearly. But I did nothing to do or deserve to live in America. At some point in time, my great-great-great-grandparents came over, probably on a ship. I don't think they swam. And I was therefore born in America. I did nothing to do that, but history affected me. My passport says citizen of the United States of America. I love it, but I didn't choose it. Is it possible that people in history erected invisible walls that God chooses to honor between us and him? What are these walls? Could it be that they have been wickedness that God could not stand to be part of? If my daughter comes to me someday and says, Daddy, come walk with me. I'd love to walk with you, sweetheart. Where do you want to walk? Just down the street. Fine, let's walk down the street. And we start passing houses, and she lights them on fire as we go by. It's a family thing. But I'm just kidding. And she lights this house on fire. That's a little odd. We should have a talk about that later. And we go to the next house, and she lights that one on fire. I love her. But can I walk with her? If she lights other people's houses on fire? You see, that's a silly illustration. I know. But is there something that can come between us that's invisible? Even though I love her deeply, could I walk with her knowing she was destroying people's lives? Her words say, Dad, let's have a connection, but her actions say, Dad, get out of my life. So because I love her, I send her letters, a quiet, gentle means of reaching out to her in love without violating her free will to not have me in her life. Is it possible that God desires to talk to people, but there is something that comes between us, a historical barrier? But asking the question, why won't God talk to me, is not completely fair if we don't ask, have I taken the time to read what he wrote to me in the Bible? If God inspired the Bible, which he claims to do, it is his message to me. How insulting if he wrote a letter to me and I didn't take the time to read it. To just have it ignored and then to be told to do a party trick to prove that you exist. I think asking the question, why won't God talk to me, is fair, but I think we also have to ask, what would hinder him not talking to me? And then have I read what he claims to have inspired? Now, why else do people say that God does not exist? B, he doesn't appear to be involved in his creation. There's a lot of wonderful people in the world that are agnostics, that believe God does exist, but that is not involved in his creation. If there is a God, and suppose he's good, why? Do bad things happen to good people? I was talking to my father the other day. He was telling me about a young man that has 4 kids. New wife. Just bought a house. Nice guy. Wonderful guy. Contracted COVID. Never left the hospital. 4 kids. 4 little boys. Never know their dad beyond a faint memory in childhood. Little boys. Beautiful family. Why do bad things happen to good people? Hurricanes slam into shores. Earthquakes rock them from underneath. Wildfires. Global pandemics. Terrorist group topple governments. People take their own lives. Bad things happen to good people. According to the World Health Organization, estimated 820 million people did not have enough to eat in 2018. That's well over double the population of the United States and Canada combined. Wouldn't a benevolent God care? Now, I said benevolent, and I've also used the pronoun he when I'm talking about God. That's for another talk, who God is. But let's say that he's benevolent. If there is a God, wouldn't you think he'd want to do something about it? Is it possible that the bad things that happen are the result of humanity's demands of God to extract himself from life? Let's say our town has a fire department. I love those guys. I appreciate that they're there 24/7. It makes a world of difference, especially if you have a daughter like mine. And she does not burn down houses. She's not even 3 yet. Yes, not even 3 yet. Whew, we're planning her 3rd birthday. She's not even 3 yet. She's not burned down any houses, nor do we have any intention of her burning down houses ever. But if we demand of the fire department that they leave town, fine, they leave town. Do you think that'll have some repercussions when your house burns down? If anything, these bad things that affect us all should point or to tell us to search for an answer to why that happens. Now see, why don't people believe that God is real or exists? Because see, he doesn't answer my prayers. We talked about this a little bit. Let me go through it again. If God exists, why doesn't he answer my prayers? Can't he hear me? Doesn't he care? If he has unlimited power, how hard would it be for him to fix my car, to heal my cancer, to fix my marriage, to get me a good job, to get my kids off drugs, to help me feel safe, to help my grandkids be happy? It's a hard question, as I think many people want to give God a try, and when they don't see results, see it as a waste of time. But is it possible that God failed to meet or to prove himself, or failed to meet my expectations? Is it possible that God failed to prove himself or failed to meet my expectations? Is it reasonable that if there is a God, he is not required to meet my expectations in order to exist? The interesting thing about the Bible is that often God does what is not expected. Just take Jesus, for example. The Bible teaches that Jesus is God's Son, God in the flesh. The great Savior of the Jews was born into a woman that had little rank or wealth. If you were sending your son to be a king of your people, wouldn't you pick the wealthiest, most well-educated, most established, influential family to have your son go into? He does the unexpected. He sends him to Mary and Joseph, a family of not great means. His dad was a carpenter. His adopted father was a carpenter. He had no grand courts welcome Jesus, and in fact, 33 years after his birth, the Roman government crucified the Son of God as a common criminal. His life was marked by the unexpected. Think about this. There's a passage in Mark. I'll read this one to you. It says this, "And there came a leper to him," this is to Jesus, "beseeching him and kneeling down to him and saying unto him, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. You can heal me. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him and saith unto him, I will be thou clean." You would expect that of Jesus, that he would heal somebody. What's unexpected is that he touched the man first. This man hadn't been touched in years. He was feared and shunned and scorned by society. He was full of leprosy. You would not touch this man. Yet Jesus did the unexpected. You can say But God, I thought for the rest of your life, but if there is a God, that still doesn't change the reality that he is not bound to meet your expectations. Furthermore, is it reasonable that if there is a God, that his knowledge of what you need may be different than what you desire? My daughter is 2, and she likes candy. Candy is pretty good. Candy is sweet. Candy is not my friend because candy equals cavities and cavities equal money. But she likes candy. She wants candy all the time. Daddy, can we have after meal treats? It's 6 a.m., sweetheart. We haven't had any meals yet. We cannot have after meal treats until after meals. That's how that works, after meal treats. And so she says, well, I want candy for breakfast. That's not what you need, sweetheart. Does she know that? No. Does she have to trust me that I know that? Yeah. And then D, why do people believe that God is not real? Because D, brilliant people say God doesn't exist. You might use, instead of the word brilliant, you might use well-educated in there. Well-educated, well-known could be another word you could use in there. And so maybe you could use some of those words. Let me give you a couple of quotes from some famous names. Stephen Hawking, the famous theoretical physicist, said in his final book, "There is no God, no one directs the universe." Albert Einstein said, "The word God is for me nothing more than the expression and product of human weakness. The Bible, a collection of honorable but still primitive legends, which are nevertheless pretty childish." Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist, says, "The only watchmaker is the blind forces of physics," in The God Delusion. Elsewhere, he says, "I cannot know for certain, but I think God is very improbable. And I live my life on the assumption that he is not there." That was an interview with the New York Times. Neil deGrasse Tyson says, who's the astronomical physicist, said in an interview with CBS, "The more I look at the universe, the less I'm convinced of something benevolent going on." Don't smart people know what they're talking about? What we are really asking is this, though. How could science fail to find God? If he was there and it was obvious, wouldn't these smart people, well-educated people, have found him? Yes and no. Because smart people are all interpreting information. The information they are interpreting is difficult to interpret because it is historical information. You cannot reproduce the Big Bang in your laboratory. You'll get fired for it. That doesn't work like that. Is it possible, I'm saying they have, is it possible that brilliant people have interpreted the information they have access to incorrectly? If I gave you a small piece of a fabric of this chair, just an inch square, you got 1 little inch, 1 square inch, not very much. But if you had never seen our sanctuary before and you had 1 square inch of fabric, could you extrapolate that was a chair? You could extrapolate that it was something, right? It was fabric, must be designed. Maybe the parameters of what it's designed looks like it has a good abrasion resistance. It's a neutral color, probably goes in a commercial setting, not in a flamboyant, designer's house. But could you tell me exactly what kind of chair that was? You see, it's hard because they're looking at a small piece of information that's historical in nature that cannot be reproduced. And so they have to interpret that. An accurate conclusion is hard to reach when limited information is available. And herein lies the problem. I am trusting how someone else interprets the limited information that they have found. This is true whether you come to the conclusion that God exists or not. It's a conclusion you come to by faith, trusting someone else. I spoke to a young man one time outside our church, and he was very, very upset with me, and I was trying to reason with him about this subject. He was very upset with me because the conclusion I came to is that we are all trusting by faith someone else for our view of the universe, for our worldview, for our theology. And he was arguing that science was teaching him. But he doesn't have a degree in astronomical physics, theoretical physics. He doesn't have a degree in biology. He doesn't have a degree in paleontology, and neither do I. And most of those people that are interpreting information have a degree in a single field, not in all those fields. And so it's a little harder. And so we have to take that, what they're saying, that they've interpreted the information correctly by faith. The same is true as a Christian. The information that I'm believing from the Bible is taking somebody else at their word. It angered him so greatly that I was showing him that his foundation was built on faith in someone else, just like mine was. And so to say that I believe that there isn't a God, or believe that there is a God because well-educated people say is a rocky road to walk. It's putting your hands in somebody else, your life in somebody else's hands. Now quickly, why else would we believe that there isn't a God? Evidence points to the universe being an accident. If the universe was an accident, then we don't have an evidence for God or need him, do we? If the universe is an accident, there's no need for God being there. That's the rationale of the Bible, that we can know God exists because a creation must have a creator. And so this is the rationale about the Bible. It says this in Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. But didn't Mr. Darwin note that evolution was scientifically possible with his work on finches? Aren't there anatomical similarities between apes and people? Yes, Mr. Darwin did accurately chronicle that evolution exists, but microevolution. A change within a species according to outside factors impressing their forces, such as how we can get different shapes of dogs from a common ancestor, or how humans can have different colors of skin. They did a study a while ago about the size of humans throughout time in the UK. Really interesting, because people shrink and grow according to the diets and the climate and the lack of wars, the calmness of the time, lots of different factors. And people actually physically grow as they have children, and then shrink if things are not going so well, they're malnourished or whatnot. And so their changes, small changes, are perfectly fine to happen. Macroevolution, the change from one species to another, though, such as an ape evolving into a human, has not been chronicled accurately, especially since when we look back in history, we are finding animals that have gone extinct that are a struggle to interpret without seeing them in their natural habitat. For example, ducks. If ducks were extinct and you looked back at a duck, you'd say, well, that's the link between a water creature because it has webbed feet and an air-breathing creature because it's happily enjoying the oxygen that we enjoy. But we look at a duck and say, that's a duck. There is not it's not a transition animal. There's no ancestor that it can connect to in the ocean that's still there, and there's no thing that it evolves to that it has a connection to on this side. It's its own species of duck. Seals and otters and hippopotamuses could also be used. You ask, what about cavemen? Doesn't that prove that humans evolve? The problem is when you look at a caveman and their technology, art, and culture, it mirrors closely what you'd expect from humanity that is originated in humans created by God with the capacity to learn, grow, and adapt. So I am perfectly fine. You say, well, doesn't evolution show that cavemen were at a basic level of technology and education, and then we've advanced through evolution? Well, not necessarily, because if God created people, they would have followed the same path. For example, we as Christians don't believe that God created people with a cell phone in their hand. They had to work the process through of discovering the metals and the way the electricity works and the way glass works and the way metal, all the different pieces work, and you pop up, you have a cell phone. I'm perfectly fine with that. And so when I see basic, I don't want to insult their culture, of being a stone being used as a tool instead of a power tool, I'm perfectly content with that, because that was the means in which they had at the time, and then God gave them the ability, I believe that God gave them the ability to grow over time, and that's how we end up with a power tool at the end of the day instead of a rock. It's not a problem. And so I don't see that as a caveman as a being evolving to become the people that we are today in technology as a viable excuse for saying that there isn't a God. And then let me give you another one. Why do people say that God doesn't exist? F, the hypocrisy of the religious community. If there was a God and he was loving and people knew him, why wouldn't those people be in the kindest, most loving people in the world? And that's a good question, and one for which the Bible says we will answer to, as Jesus himself calls us to love ye your enemies in Luke 6, and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and you shall be the children of the highest, for he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. His first command is for us to love God and love each other. And we strive to do that. But to judge God by his followers is somewhat unfair, as one weed can make a yard unkept. I was driving through Lexington, Virginia last week. I've never been to Lexington, Virginia. Really neat town. You should go sometime. Just interesting history. Small town, but they have the military academy there. And it's pretty neat. And so I was driving through, and I made a mistake. I was following a sign, a tourist road sign that was set up by the town, and it was somewhat misleading. And so I found myself making a traffic violation, and I realized that there was, I was going to be inhibiting traffic in a minute. And so I quickly corrected my mistake and pulled out in the traffic, but apparently I had not corrected my mistake swiftly enough or smoothly enough, or I'd gotten in somebody's way very quickly. And there was a very, very angry townsperson who gestured unkindly, I thought, according to the transgression, and he or she gestured, and the rest of my time in Lexington, Virginia, was spent tainted by one townsperson. I thought, oh man, these people are not very nice. Must have not like terrorists very much. Not very patient with us, for sure. Is that fair to a town, to judge the entire town by one person? It's not very fair. Is it fair to judge God by the performance of his people? It is true that Christians should be the most loving and kind people you meet, and yet we freely confess that we are not perfect, but we are trying. So it's not really a viable means of saying there is God. And then G, happy lives can be led by people who ignore God. You could say it this way: if I don't need God, why care if he exists or not? Richard Dawkins makes this point. If there is God, if there is a God, why isn't my life lacking in happiness for not knowing him? If I love bananas. I really like bananas. I just think they're phenomenal. They're probably because they're cheap. Let's just be honest. They're cheap. And they're always there in the grocery store. You don't have to there's no rocket science for picking them out in season. Like the watermelon, you have to tap it to see if it's hollow? What? Bananas go from green to yellow, and then they're ready to go. It's like there's a color code built into it, right? But if I had only eaten bananas my entire life, could I honestly answer, I'm happy with just bananas, thank you, if you asked me if I wanted an orange? If I had only ever eaten bananas, nothing else in my life, and you came to me and said, do you want an orange? Could I honestly say I'm happy with just bananas, thank you? You would have to say, I don't know, not I'm happy with, because you don't have anything to compare your experience to. Is it possible that you are missing out and you don't know it because you don't know what you are missing out on? I can speak from experience. I was pretty happy before getting to know God. Maybe you could say that my life was even more pleasurable because I lived by less rules than the stuck-up Christians live by. Even though when I left a debris trail of relationships, casualties, peers, siblings, and authority a mile long in my pleasure. But pleasing myself didn't answer this question. What happens if there is life and a God after I die? Here's what I'm asking. Is pleasure in this life the only thing that matters? If pleasure in this life is the only thing that matters, then why do people love working out? Or hunting for that perfect treasure, learning to read, growing a garden, holding down a job? Why do soldiers shoulder their packs and weapons and walk into war? Because that's what makes them happy, or because that's what's needful? No, because pleasure doesn't answer every question. And H, we're going to be moving quickly. God's rules are archaic. God's rules are archaic. I think there is a growing number of people, especially young people, that would say that they don't want to know God, even if there is one, because his laws are repulsive to their view of life. Even disgusting. I could never worship a God that sends people to hell. And I think that's fair to ask. But we must also ask, could you worship a creator who knew that hell was required in order for him to be a just God in light of the wickedness in the world, and who himself offered to take your place in going there if you would but reach out and accept his offer at no cost to you, purely out of love? Could you worship that God? If God only sent the really bad people that deserve hell to hell, how would anyone know who was going to be damned? You would live your entire life. I don't know. Maybe I was good enough. And what would you think of a judge that allowed some people to escape hell because they weren't all that bad? Because how then would you define that line? Hitler would say, he wasn't that bad. Wouldn't entrance into heaven or damnation to hell become a bribing game with God? I was bad, but then I did a bunch of good, so now you, as a judge, would have to let me in your paradise. What would you feel? How do you think I would feel if my sweet, innocent daughter was hit by a drunk driver and killed? And he stood before the judge, and he said, yeah, judge, I did it, but I was a really good person afterwards, and a really good person before. How do you think I would feel about that judge? The judge said, all right, you were really good. Yeah, you did that one bad thing, but you were really good. I'll let it go. You're okay. Go live your life. No consequences. How would I feel as dad about that judge? I wouldn't think very much of him. How would we feel about God if it was a bribing game to get into heaven or not? Even if we don't agree with God's laws, does it change that they could be a reality for us? I ride motorcycles, not very often. Oh, I do own them, and they're quite fast. They're exceedingly faster than I need to go. I recently had one that I think was it had the world speed record for production motorcycles in 2007. So it was pushing like 193 miles an hour top speed. Now I don't go that as a staff member of Bethel, but I do love going fast, and I really hate going slow. But does that change the law? Doesn't really change the law. If a police officer sees me going 65 and a 25, it doesn't matter if I like it or not. I will get the ticket. And then my last point on why people might believe that there is not a God. Diversity of religion. If there is a God, why don't all religions acknowledge him and have the same holy book? Even just the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims would say that their God is different. This question is fairly easy and goes hand in hand with why bad things happen to good people. The answer lies in this question. If there is a God, could he not have an enemy? This enemy would not be God himself, but who has rejected God and is allowed to operate as God endows his creation with free will instead of immediately crushing them. If then God has an enemy, why would that enemy not create confusion by counterfeiting religion? Now the question must be then asked, what makes your religion the right one, since most people choose religion according to their parents? For example, I am a Christian. My parents were Christians. My grandparents were Christians. You could say that I'm a Christian because of my grandparents. That would be untrue because I'm a Christian because I feel that is the most accurate, truthful way of life. That doesn't matter. You would say that I'm a Christian because my parents and my grandparents were Christians. And I've tried to be desperately fair to be working this accurately. But we'll try to address this question later on. So hold it in the back of your mind. Now, I've tried to desperately be fair in working to find answers to honest questions about why there is a God. But now in the remaining time, we have to turn to some evidence that there is a God. So what are some evidence for God? Why would I believe that God is real, other than the reasons that I gave you a minute ago? And I'll give you 3. The complexity of creation points to God. Psalm 19, which is the book of songs in the Bible, says this: the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. The Bible is claiming that the complexity of the universe is, and the grandeur of the universe is telling us that an intelligent being created it. You could start with the weaker subpoints to this and argue that life is just too pleasant or enjoyable to be an accident. For example, the ability to connect with the warmth of community. You say, what's a part of the complexity of the universe? That I have the ability to connect with you through language, through the physical presence of being with you, through touch, through experiences that we can share, memory, and I love that. But it's a somewhat weak, maybe, to say that, for example, I've heard somebody say that, claim that there's a God because bunnies have white tails, so they're easier to catch when you're hunting them. Well, that's not very convenient for the bunny. And so this is maybe a weaker argument. But what about spices, texture, color, flavor, smells, coffee, chocolate, bread, cakes, pasta, adventure, warmth of the sand of the beach, coolness of the mountain stream, enjoyableness of intimacy? You think about a tree. It creates heat, a building material and paper, but it also creates oxygen, and it's sustainable. Quite amazing. And it's almost universally grown around our planet. These are a good case for why, if God exists, that he is good. But a stronger argument that he exists is that the world is precisely what it needs to be for human life. And so when I say that there's evidence for, or the complexity of creation points to God, this is what more I'm speaking of. Ethan Siegel, which is a theoretical astrophysicist, says this: we're at the right distance from our sun so that temperatures are conducive to life. We have the right atmospheric pressure for liquid water at our surface. We have the right amount of water so that our world has both oceans and continents. Physicist philosopher Robin Collins says gravity is fine-tuned to 1 part of 100 million billion 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 billion. The cosmological constant, which represents the energy density of space, is as precise as throwing a dart from space and hitting a bullseye just a trillionth of an inch in diameter on Earth. Earth's position. Similar to the fine-tuning of physics, Earth's position is in the universe, and its intricately choreographed geological and chemical processes work together with exquisite efficiency to create a safe place for humans to live. What about the 6 feet of DNA coiled inside every one of our body's 100 trillion cells, and it contains a 4-letter chemical alphabet that spells out the precise assembly instructions for all the proteins for which our bodies are made. Cambridge-educated Stephen Meyer demonstrates that no hypothesis has come close to explaining how information got into biological matter by naturalistic means. On the contrary, he says that whatever we find a sequential arrangement that's complex and corresponds to an independent pattern or function, such as books or computer code, this kind of information is always the product of intelligence. Information is the hallmark of a mind, Meyer says, and purely from the evidence of genetics and biology, we can infer the existence of a mind that is far greater than our own, a conscious, purposeful, rational, intelligent designer who's amazingly creative. If the universe has not been made with the most extracting precision, we could never have come into existence, said Harvard-educated astrophysicist John O'Keefe of NASA. There are more than 30 physical, cosmological parameters that require precise calibration in order to produce a universe that can sustain life. How is it possible that Earth has them all? Someone put them there. But when I say complexity, I don't even mean that. What I mean is this. We must consider the timing of things, meaning the sequence of life demands that life happen maturely and therefore instantaneously by a created hand. Let me give you some quick examples because our time is fleeting. Think about the orange tree. I grew up in Florida. Orange trees everywhere. Well, until they froze. Now there's less orange trees. But there used to be orange trees there. What were orange trees doing to pollinate before orange blossoms evolved? You can't have oranges which contain seeds for reproduction without blossoms. So what were they doing before orange blossoms evolved? What about the caterpillar? For the caterpillar, information is needed to cocoon itself and metamorphose into a butterfly. But that information would have been lost because the creature would have died in the process, because too many steps would have been needed to evolve at the same time. Take sea turtles. Sea turtles are interesting. I've actually seen sea turtles hatch out of the sand and then swim to the beach. Super amazing, special thing. Totally encourage you to see it, but you kind of have to know where they are and when they're going to hatch. Otherwise, you'd be waiting all night long for sea turtles to pop out of the sand. But sea turtles bury their eggs in the sand. If evolution was the process, then why didn't the first sea turtles' eggs, how did the first sea turtles' eggs know how to hatch? Dig themselves out and head towards the ocean. Would they not have died in the process because that information was not stamped in their minds? Sea turtles are not great land animals if you've ever seen them. Why would a sea turtle baby look at his flippers and would he have the capacity to look at his flippers as just a little baby and say, oh, I need to head towards the water, without having that information stamped upon his mind? What about blood clotting? Before our blood evolved our ability to clot on its own, you'd have bled from the smallest cut. You'd shave, and then you'd cut yourself, and you'd bleed out. That's really sad. How about the bacterial flagellum? What did the bacteria do before it evolved the ability to get around? How about plants? What did plants do for food before they evolved the ability to synthesize food using the energy of the sun? Wouldn't they have starved to death in the evolutionary process? So you see, the instantaneous timing of things into a mature being is required. It's like the chicken and the egg. Which one came first? Well, obviously the chicken came first because an egg would have died without a chicken to sit on it, right? It has to be the chicken. So there has to be something that was mature, that was created instantaneously, because it's just too complicated. It doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. And then B, the beginning points to God. Now let's ignore the complexity of life argument for just a minute. I know it was a little heavy. Let's just ignore it for a minute. But I think that we shouldn't ignore it, but let's focus on the origin of matter. Let me explain. If you can put a completely empty container on this podium, and it was completely sealed and it was totally empty, and you came back 1,000 years later, you would expect to find it empty. That's how the world works. There would not be a flower in it or a rock. It would be an empty container. That is why I think all matter has origin, meaning it came into existence at some point, a beginning, a cause. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves, did they come into being of their own ability or by the hand of a higher power? So we have all this matter in the universe, right? Tons of matter. So we have to ask ourselves, looking at that container on the podium, did that matter that we see running around come into existence of itself, or was it placed there? Which also leads us to ask, if all matter came from God, where did God come from? Christians believe that he is self-existent. Exodus 3:14. He claims to be ever alive as he calls himself, I am. So the question is, what is self-existent? Energy and matter, or God? You have to decide in your life which one created itself or has always existed, energy and matter, or God. Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, said in the lecture, there is no reason why the world could not have come into being without a cause, nor, on the other hand, is there any reason why it should not have always existed. I agree with Mr. Russell that the origin of matter is a difficult question, but I do not agree with his contentment to believe that a container containing no matter could someday contain matter. That is not reasonable science to me. Otherwise, we would see matter come into being of its own. But now let's put this aside, as it seems we have either have to believe the impossible that God has always existed, or that matter and energy create itself. Though I think it deserves scrutiny not to be ignored, because even though you can't explain something, does not mean you should ignore it. Now, though we might not all agree on the origin of matter, we all have to agree that the universe is moving towards heat death. So, or the using of all available energy, which is the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy is constantly happening. This is why your stove cools after you bake cookies. So let me explain. If the universe has no beginning, eventually all available energy would eventually be consumed. Right? And if it was consumed, why wouldn't that have happened a billion years before us? If the total amount of mass energy is limited and the amount of usable energy is decreasing, then the universe cannot have existed forever. Otherwise, it would already have exhausted all usable energy and reached what is known as heat death, the creation answer book tells us. The law of entropy could also be applied to the theory of evolution. If all things tend to disorder, where did the original information come to create order? So if you put a box of coins on this podium and you shook the coins, you would never expect them to stand up all at the same time. Maybe you would get one to stand up, but you never expect all of them to stand up, because it's disorder, and then it doesn't create order. Order, if you saw a box of coins being all placed and standing up, you would think, oh, somebody's been here and they placed all those coins and I'm going to knock them over now, would be what you would think. Evolution from molecules to man needs some way of creating new complex genetic programs or information. Mutation and natural selection leads to loss of information, the same book says. And then lastly, let me give you a third reason why, what the third viable reason for God existing, and I'll be done. Because the supernatural exists. People seem to fall into two camps about the supernatural, especially as we get around Halloween. They either shun it or they embrace it. And so, I'm not sure which one you fall into. But our remaining few minutes, let's interact with the supernatural. Let's interact with the prophecy of the Bible, the book that claims to be God's word. Let me show you something you can't explain. The Bible has dozens of prophecies that come true both about people groups, about cultures, but specifically about one man, Jesus Christ, who claims to be the Son of God. Now, is it possible to fake prophecies? Oh, yeah, it's possible. For example, if I came to you the day after the Super Bowl and said, hey, I knew in the 2021 year, the Buccaneers were going to win the Super Bowl. You'd be like, sure. You say, I prophesied it. Well, it's pretty easy for me to say I prophesied something in the past, right? Especially if I didn't write it down and then timestamp it. And that's just a 50-50 odds. I mean, I could have written down a paper for each team, right? I could have said, okay, this team's going to win and this team's going to win, and I'll just use whatever paper, see, I said so, is whatever one. But what if I wrote down which one was going to win 150 years before and timestamped it? And 50-50 odds is pretty easy, right? We should up the odds significantly, tremendously. So they found in 1947 a pile of scrolls called the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in those scrolls contains the entire book of Isaiah. And that copy of Isaiah was written about 125 BC. And so that's about 150 years before Jesus was actively walking the earth as an adult. In that text alone, it describes that the Messiah, the person that God sent to be the Savior of the Jews and the world, would speak in parables in Isaiah 6. He would spend significant time in Galilee, Isaiah 9. He'd be an heir of David's throne, Isaiah 9 says. He would be called to be a Nazarene, Isaiah 11 it says, which is kind of like being from a certain region. Kind of like if you would say, I'm a North Carolinian. It'd be a certain region. A messenger would go before him, Isaiah 40 says. He'd be spit upon and struck, Isaiah 50 says. Messiah would be rejected by his own people, Isaiah 53 says. He'd be silent when accused, Isaiah 53 says. He'd be crucified with animals, Isaiah 53. Buried with the rich, Isaiah 53. Sent to heal the brokenhearted, Isaiah 61. So 150 years later, after that book was written and buried as a Dead Sea Scroll and time-stamped essentially, we have this man on the scene that fulfills each one of those things. The problem is that's just one of the 39 books that's in the Old Testament. You have to deal with the other 38 that also said things about him, and each one proved to be accurate. So that's very alarming, if you will. You say, well, I want to see the supernatural. I want to know that God exists. That is supernatural. That is unexplainable information. You can't just fake that. We can't ignore that this didn't happen. We can hunt for answers to it, but we can't ignore that the hand of the supernatural being appears to be involved in the writing of the Bible. Now, in conclusion, we do not have time to review everything. There's lots of different points. But I hope it sparked within you a motivation to find the answer to this question. Is there a God? Because coming to him with the excuse of ignorance is not acceptable. Specifically, with there's so much information out there that shows that there is a God. The Bible says this about trying to come to God ignorantly. Because that which may be known of God is manifest or shown clearly in them, for God has showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. This is God saying, the world around you is pointing toward an intelligent being. We can't ignore that. But and you say, well, that's pretty hard. Take comfort in this. This was written 2,000 years before, give or take, many years before the microscope and the telescope were invented. You do not have to be an astrophysicist, and you do not have to be the most brilliant biologist in the world to know there is a God, there's not a God. So you can look at the information available and interpret that accordingly. Because if you come to the conclusion that there is a God, you have to then answer this question. Who is he? Can I know him? And do I have an obligation to him? Because if he does exist and he does have a law with an expectation of obeying it, then I need to know that. And I would say this. If you come to the conclusion that there is a God, which I hope you did, I would say it's a safe bet to assume that he has you have a moral obligation to him, meaning there is a set of standards that he holds you to. And this is why I say that. Every major religion teaches that this principle, that there is a way that you should live and a way that you should not live. Now, they might agree on some of the finer points, but every major religion teaches that. So everyone that claims to say that they believe in God says that you have an obligation to God. There's a moral standard to follow. So since all of religions say that, I would say it's a safe bet to assume that is the case. Why I am a Christian is that the Bible teaches that Jesus offered to take the penalty for my crimes against God instead of me paying for them purely out of his love for me. Since I don't believe in doing good or being good pays off my crimes, I wholeheartedly embrace that offer. That, which was very appealing, and the prophecy of the Bible shows me that there is something different about this book. I have tried to keep my personal experience out of this and talk out of this talk specifically as evidence, because I didn't want somebody to come to me and say, you're just using your personal experience with God as evidence that there is a God. And I've tried to keep that out of this talk. But let me leave you with this. The relationship I have with God is everything to me. It's more precious than any possession I own or accomplishment I've ever achieved. The richness he brought into my life is beyond comparison, and I deeply love him. I have not found his rules stifling. In fact, they were needful for structuring guidance in my life. I have always found him to be good, wise, loving, kind, and patient with me. And I hope you do as well in your discovery of him. We'll say goodbye to those of you online. Thank you so much for joining us. We are humbled with your presence. Trust that you'll poke around our website some and listen to other messages by our pastor. We are live for all 3 services of the week, Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And trust that you'll have a good evening.